Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the disputed nuclear program of Iran. Iran claims that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, that it is enriching uranium to use in nuclear power plants to generate electricity. The world powers, however, believe that it's got a covert nuclear weapons program. UN has imposed sanctions, so has the US against Iran. While sanctions are on, at the same time, there is a dialogue process which has been started by the 5 nuclear powers plus Germany, known as P5+1. About half a dozen dialogues have been held with Iran in a bid to persuade it to give up its nuclear ambitions. The last such dialogue was in Almaty in Kazakhstan a few days ago, and it ended without any results. To discuss the issue of Iran's disputed nuclear power program, I have with me a very distinguished panel. I have Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, one of the most outspoken and clear-headed Foreign Secretaries India has been lucky to have. Ambassador Rajiv Sikri, a very experienced diplomat. As Secretary in the Foreign Officer, you looked after the Arab world and Israel and Iran. And my old friend, Ambassador Vivek Katju, he's also an old Iran hand, having handled Iran for the longest period of time in the Foreign Office recently. So welcome all of you to this conversation. Vivek, let me begin with you. Tell us how this whole thing began. What is the background? Why does the world not trust Iran?
Well, the Iranian conduct over the past few decades, especially on the nuclear issue, has been not very transparent or clear. And it certainly, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't evoke trust. And therefore, if there is suspicion that Iran is in breach of its obligations as a member of the NPT, then there's good ground for that. This matter has been taken up in Vienna, and now the world powers say that you will not enrich uranium. As far as India is concerned, we too have taken the view that Iran must adhere to its obligations, which it voluntarily undertook under the NPT.
Okay. So this dialogue that's been going on, it's to persuade Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions. Take the Almaty dialogue we just ended. European Union says that the positions of Iran and the world powers are a long way apart, while Russia seems to suggest that there's been some progress in the process of the dialogue. How do you read the outcome of the dialogue?
Well, you know, Russia is not in favor of military action against Iran. So they will always look for arguments against the Western countries precipitating a crisis or allowing Israel to push for military action against Iran. Therefore, they would not like to admit that the process of dialogue has broken down and will look for silver linings. Though I know from the inside they are persuaded that Iran has nuclear weapon ambitions, and that's a question of time when they decide to become overt. Now, so far as the Western countries are concerned, they want to keep stepping up pressure on Iran. They have stepped up pressure on Iran and want to continue to do so. At the same time, they're also not ready for military action at this point in time because U.S. has already had 2 wars in this region, and a 3rd war, given U.S.'s financial and other problems and military overstretch, is not on the cards. At the same time, they don't want Israel to have arguments to take any unilateral action. Therefore, they have imposed sanctions, and very tough sanctions, and they're putting a lot of pressure on the rest of the world, including us. Though I do think that they have made some there has been a softening of their position in the sense that they are willing to allow Iran to enrich up to 5%, but want Iran to stop enriching up to 20%. Now, the game from Iran's point of view is to have an action-reaction kind of a cycle of concession and counter-concession. That if I stop doing, if I take the first step, you take the first step on sanctions, and therefore there is a virtuous cycle going upwards. Yeah. So that's where the problem is.
Okay. Mr. Sikri, let's take Iran's claims on face value. They say that we want to generate electricity, that's why we are enriching uranium. Now, why does Iran need nuclear electricity? It's got enough oil, it's got enough gas. Generating nuclear electricity costs several times more than generating electricity from oil or gas. So why should the world take this at face value? Why do they expect people to believe them?
I think the issue of Iran's nuclear program is a little more complicated. Let's first recall that it was the United States which set up Iran's nuclear
In
program.
Shah's time.
Shah's time, when they were friends and allies. Then in the early 2000s, the Iranians were adhering to the additional protocol of the IAEA, even though they had not signed it. And
What does the additional protocol
additional
expect them
protocol
to do?
of the IAEA was that, which we have also signed, an additional protocol which goes beyond the NPT and imposes restrictions on what you can do. So that basically you cannot develop nuclear weapons, and there is a series of inspections which the IAEA is entitled to do. They were allowing all that. It is really when the matter was taken out of the IAEA's hands and taken to the Security Council in 2005 and 2006, and if you recall, the Indian vote in the IAEA was a very controversial matter, that things got off hand. Now, I think that the American objective at that time was really to get a leverage on Iran on other issues and via the nuclear thing. And what were the other issues? Basically that they wanted to prevent Iran from dominating Iraq, which was collapsing, after the state of, after Saddam was thrown out. And the nuclear issue, which was, if it is in the Security Council, would give them greater leverage. Then, of course, we have had a series of negotiations and so forth, and the sanctions have been tightened.
Yeah, that's history. I understand that. So that's important. But the question is, why do they expect the world to believe, and why do they
I
continue
think that
with
the
this subterfuge?
Iranians are really looking for what is called recessed deterrence, namely that they should have the capability to develop a nuclear weapon should the need arise, which many other countries have also, like South Korea or Japan, who are 2 weeks away from that.
But to answer your question, since you said one can butt in, the South Koreans are now setting up a nuclear power plant in the UAE, and the UAE is a big exporter of hydrocarbons. So you can't tell the Iranians that, look, you've got enough gas and oil, and you don't need nuclear power. And at the same time, the Western world is allowing UAE to have a nuclear power plant, and tomorrow there may be other countries too. The argument is climate change, environment, that the initial capital cost of nuclear energy is high, but the running cost is not, and there are a lot of advantages. And since oil and hydrocarbons are a declining commodity, therefore it should be saved for the purposes for which it should be best used,
Non-renewable.
rather than for producing
Okay,
electricity.
no, we need to take a break, Vivek, at this juncture. We'll take a break just now. Don't go away. We'll be back with this discussion after the break. Welcome back. We are discussing Iran's disputed nuclear program. Vivek, I wanted to ask you about enrichment. Now, for generating electricity, if that is indeed the case with Iran, you need 3.5 to 5% enrichment. Now, secretly, they've gone up to 20%. And if you have enough stockpile of 20% uranium-235, you can take it up to 90% theoretically and make it weapons grade. So why has Iran been so secretive? That's the new plant at Fordo, which is carved out of a mountainside, the stockpiling at Natanz. All these don't sort of give the world any confidence in what the Iranians are saying.
The crucial element here is enrichment up to 20%. I think once a country is able to achieve that, then making weapons grade, enriching stuff to weapons grade is not very difficult. The Iranian conduct, as you've yourselves illustrated, has been such that everyone believes, notwithstanding Iranian protestations, that they are actually wanting to have the capability to make a nuclear weapons. Now, the Iran prior to 1979 and post 1979 Iran are very different countries.
Although in 1979 they stopped the nuclear program, Ayatollah Khomeini stopped it completely because he says it's un-Islamic. It's 2000 onwards that the program again takes off.
Well, we can get into history, but what's relevant is that I think the Iranians cannot stomach the idea that India and Pakistan have weapons and they don't. A, the Iranians believe that they are the leaders of Shiite Islam. Two, let's face it, they've had this terribly superior feeling towards South Asia and the other parts of the Muslim world. There's this feeling that we are culturally and educationally and civilizationally, we have a certain standing.
Are they equal, if not better?
We are equal, if
So
not
they're
better.
willing to steal nuclear designs and buy them in the black market.
Well, they're willing to do,
the superiority.
look, they're willing to do everything, but they want this power. Now, the question is, what will they do with this? And I think the big debate in the West at the moment is, how do you stop this program?
Okay.
Will
So,
the sanctions
in fact,
work or not?
That's the question
That's
I'd like
the
to
crucial issue.
take to Ambassador Sikri. So do you think this carrot and stick policy, or stick and carrot policy in this case, that is sanctions and dialogue, is this the best way of persuading Iran to roll back its program?
I think for Iran, it's very important that any concessions they give are not seen as being under duress or pressure. They must be allowed to save face. And therefore, some formula will have to be found, because my experience with the Iranians is that they will not buckle under. They're quite used to tightening their belts and so forth, even though the sanctions are hitting them hard. But I think that some exit route needs to be given to the Iranians. And maybe the time will come after the presidential elections, which are due in a couple of months, whenever the new president comes in. And that might be the occasion to say, okay, now here's a new man, we can deal with him and so on and so forth.
Okay. Ambassador Sibal, President Barack Obama says that there's no way he would allow Iran to go nuclear. Then he goes to Israel and plays up Israeli insecurities that Tel Aviv and Jerusalem would be nuked sooner than later by Iran, while ignoring Israel's own nuclear program, the Diplomat research reactor, which many claim has already produced enough uranium, and Israel, they assume, has 100 to 200 nuclear weapons already. So why are you preventing Iran from going nuclear, at the same time going along with the Israeli subterfuge? Is it because the US wants Israel to be the sole nuclear power in that region?
Well, it's more complicated than that. Israel feels extremely vulnerable. Whether they are hyping up their vulnerability is another matter, that they're such a small country that they can't withstand a nuclear strike, and they'll be finished. And they don't trust the Iranian regime. They think it is almost a psychopathic regime. And of course, the Iranians give them fuel to propagate this by saying that Israel should be wiped off the map of the Middle East and stuff like that. Therefore, their vulnerability are existential in nature. Insofar as...
But are they exaggerated? I mean, they're the most secure state in terms of...
I think they are exaggerated. I think they are exaggerated. But this is how it is. If you talk to them, it's very difficult to reason with them on this. They have a closed mind. They have a closed mind on this. And they tell you, if you talk to them, that don't underrate our determination to prevent Iran from going nuclear. We will go to the last limit.
Yeah, but to what extent will the US go to
No,
prevent...
I don't think that the US is going to try to take out Iranian nuclear weapons, because that will mean a huge war in the region. And that will leave such huge problems in its wake, as we've seen in Iraq and as we will see in Afghanistan, that it will result in permanent
so you think
turmoil.
there won't be a war?
There cannot be a war.
Okay, so
but they will keep stepping up sanctions. Now, I must mention one problem which the Americans have, which is that they think that the sanctions is the only route, and sanctions are hitting Iran. And therefore, they are not in a political position, also because of congressional pressure, to soften the sanctions, to give some kind of a face saving to Iran. So they are caught in their own bind. The political system will not allow this. Whereas the only way out, if they really want to prevent Iran from going nuclear, is to have some kind of balance in terms of what they expect from Iran and what they're willing to give to Iran, not simply spare parts for their planes and stuff like that, and ask them not to enrich up to 20%. They have to go beyond that.
Vivek, if Iran builds nuclear weapons, let's say they build a limited number of weapons, would the Iranian leadership be so foolish as to use it against a far superior Israel and commit national suicide?
No, I don't think it's a question of use. For one, permit me, I have great respect for my seniors, but I think the Iranians are determined to make the weapon, or at least, come to
a
screwdriver away from the weapon. That's my take on this. Now, it's not because they want to use it. Obviously, the Iranian regime won't commit suicide. It's very nationalistic. The Iranians are a very nationalistic people, and they'll take the punishment that is being meted out to them. But I think they will go in for this. Now, the worry that Israel and these countries have is the kind of subversion that would be Iran would be capable of. And it's not only Israel, it's the Sunni Arab states as well.
Okay.
They too will not allow.
On that note, we have to take a break. We'll continue this interesting discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the Iranian nuclear crisis. Vivek, you were saying something.
I was wanting to say that 16 years ago, an Indian foreign minister was told by one of the Gulf Arab foreign ministers that these countries could imagine themselves to be in the same trenches, I'm quoting, to be in the same trenches with Israel against Iran on the nuclear issue.
Okay, so why shouldn't Iran be allowed to have its nuclear weapons?
Well, I think firstly we are in a very difficult position to take up cudgels on behalf of the West against Iranian nuclear ambitions, because we have defied the NPT all this while.
Absolutely.
And we went
We
nuclear.
also lied and we said it was for peaceful
we
purposes.
can use the
We were
argument.
members of the NPT.
We can use the argument that Iran is a member of the NPT, therefore must abide by commitments that it has voluntarily taken. That's an argument to give. But the fact is that we went nuclear against the wishes of the international community. And Iran, if tomorrow wants to do that, we can have a legal argument against this, but we can't have a political argument against this. But I have a feeling that we should not worry too much about this, because our nuclear problem is as bad as it can be in every way. There's China, there's nuclear, Pakistan nuclear, they're collaborating with each other. China has just announced another 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plant for Pakistan, not a squeak from the Americans or the NSG or anybody else. So if Iran goes nuclear, how much will it add to our security threat? Nothing. Therefore, but one advantage there could be that at least Pakistan won't have the distinction of being the only Islamic state with a nuclear bomb.
That's a small consolation. Ambassador Sikri, is the world becoming more anxious about Iran because of how this crisis is unfolding in Korea? Do you think what happens in Korea will have a direct bearing on what happens in Iran?
I think the Iranians have taken a lesson from North Korea, because the big powers are engaging North Korea because it has weapons. Otherwise, they'd never be engaging North Korea. And Iran also, I mean, we've talked about Israel's sense of insecurity, but I think Iran also feels a sense of insecurity. After all, there are American bases all around. You have the Americans in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in Central Asia. And so they feel that they are also a threat. And as Vivek was saying, there's also the Sunni Shia factor. And now you have the aggressive Sunni attitude led by Saudi Arabia. So there is also that sense of insecurity. I think that the North Korean issue is germane to the whole
So everybody will be
perceptions, but not in all the way that people are thinking. I think that the Iranians are getting more and more determined, because they see that if you have nuclear weapons, then nobody can do
world
anything
listens
to you. So that's an insurance policy.
But let me ask you a slightly different question, Vivek. India has said that it is not going to halt its import of Iranian oil. In fact, Indian insurance companies are setting up a separate insurance fund for Iranian oil supplies. So what does this demonstrate? You know, after all, the Majlis Speaker Ali Larijani had a very successful visit here. High-level visits between India and Iran are continuing. And India doesn't seem to be looking over its shoulder to see how America is reacting. So does it show a greater sort of flexibility, greater degrees of freedom in pursuing our foreign policy?
No, I think we should continue with our relationship with Iran, no doubt about it. And to
No,
the,
I agree with
no,
that.
To
but
the
I'm saying that
extent, no.
does
to
it
the-
show a more autonomous foreign policy?
No, of course.
Emerging?
Look, I've always believed that we have an autonomous foreign policy. And on Iran, it's our commercial entities that are more concerned. Politically, whatever we are doing with Iran is fine. But I have a slightly different take. I have a little worry, which is that diplomatic efforts might not eventually succeed. And given the Israeli sense of insecurity, however unjustified it may be, we might be in for surprises, and that will put countries like India in a terribly difficult situation. I believe that the Iranian issue is perhaps one of the nuclear issues, perhaps one of the most intractable issues in
What
the world
kind of
today.
difficulties could India be put in if Iran
Well,
goes
obviously,
nuclear?
it's 6 million people in the Gulf. what, 35, $40 billion of remittances, 80% of our
So
energy
you're
supplies.
saying there might be a nuclear war? I mean,
No,
Iran
even
goes
if there's a
nuclear,
military
people
conflict.
continue working
No,
there.
look at what happened in Libya. We had to move out 18,000 people. We
Kuwait.
can't move out 6 million
exactly.
people.
That is what I mean.
So it'll affect the core of our economic interests in the Gulf and will be very disruptive insofar as we're concerned. And that's one big reason why we are advocating no military action against Iran. But there's one small point which I'd like to touch, which is really insecurity. What they feel is that once Iran gets nuclear weapons, that under the cover of those nuclear weapons, they'll encourage Hamas and Hezbollah and all to step up their terrorist attacks and rocket attacks against Israel. And I remind the Israelis, well, this is exactly what Pakistan has done to us, but nobody has stood by with us. Because Pakistan has used the nuclear shield to step up terrorism
Not
against
that
us.
Israel doesn't do all this kind of covert activity against other countries.
Now, Pakistan, interestingly, has gone ahead and signed the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline deal.
Yeah.
Pakistan is virtually dependent on America, so they don't care about what Americans think. They are pursuing their national interests with Iran. So India should also pursue
Well,
its
that
interests.
won't come up in a hurry because who's going to finance it? Who's going to ensure the security? There are so many issues involved with that pipeline. I don't even know whether it's going to be viable or not. But yes, the Pakistanis have shown a certain boldness, and they're leveraging the American dependence on Pakistan for the exit of Afghan troops from Afghanistan. So this is a temporary thing. Once the Americans turn the squeeze on Pakistan, they'll also come around. But for the moment, I don't put too much importance to that. But I think that we too should have been pursuing this matter. I think the Iranians have also not played their cards very well. If they were to offer better terms, a good price for the gas that they're selling, I think it would be more difficult for India to resist the pressures from the Americans. And
I
others.
think it helps us if Pakistan and Iran do things together. It gives us more political room vis-a-vis the Americans to do what we want.
Okay. Do you think, Vivek, India doesn't want a war in West Asia? No, but do you think India could also play a more positive role, a mediatory role to resolve this crisis in any way?
This is one beehive we shouldn't touch.
Do you agree, Ambassador Sibal?
I think we don't want to touch it because we think we may be misunderstood by the Americans, and we're not going to be able to be effective vis-a-vis the Iranians.
I have a slightly
And
different
in the
view.
past, when I was in office, we had tried to mediate, but at the request of the Iranians, but the Americans brushed it aside.
No, you had a different view.
No, I have a different-
Just let me add just one sentence. The Lula of Brazil and the Turks tried it, and you know what happened to that effort.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we should not, because we have, as Kanwal pointed out, we have huge stakes in stability in the region. We are one of the few countries which has good relations with Iran, with Israel, United States, and with the Arabs. There have been overtures from Iran, and more recently perhaps the Americans also, that can you do something? So I think that India is really ducking its response. We want to be a great power, but we don't want to do anything activist in this regard. I think this is time for diplomacy, for a little more imaginative diplomacy. Even if we can get all the parties around a table to talk about issues, to start with some confidence-building measures. After all, there are similar things happening in the East with the ARF, for example, where the North Koreans and the Taiwanese and the Americans sit on the same table. I mean, if you were to get Israel, Iran, Arabs, Americans, everyone on the same table, it would be a starting point.
Yeah, Ambassador Sibal, last word to you. Tell me something that, what Ambassador Sikri is saying, that you want to be a great power, yet you want to shirk away from all the complicated issues, and as Vivek says, don't touch this beehive. Tomorrow you'll say, don't touch that beehive. How does it sit well with your desire to, be in the UN Security Council and, help manage the world?
Well, firstly, if both the Iranians and the Americans ask us, then yes, we can take this step. But our fear is, and I think it's a legitimate fear, that we will greatly annoy very powerful lobbies in the US Congress, as well as Israel, and to no good effect at the end. And basically the issue is very, very complicated. And if the Americans and the West, they are really interested in untying the knots, there are ways to do that. And the way is quite clear, that they should agree to negotiate directly. The Americans, why can't they negotiate directly with the Iranians, give them some basic concessions? The Iranians are saying that they will agree not to reach beyond 5%. If
already
we start
reaching
removing
20%.
No, that is for their medical reactors and this and that, the rods and all. They're mastering the technology. They're mastering the technology. But one very important thing, that everything that Iran is doing under IAEA safeguards. So there is nothing that is not known about the Iranian nuclear program. The great fear of the Russians, as I know they shared with us, is that we know that they're heading in that direction, but we should not be blindsided, because the moment we do anything wrong, they'll throw the IAEA out and we lose complete knowledge of what's happening on the ground.
Thank you very much. On that note, we'll have to end because we run out of time. Thank you very much for coming to our studios and discussing the Iranian crisis. I hope we'll have you here again soon. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another issue. Till then, goodbye.